The Democratic Republic of Congo battles its 10th known Ebola epidemic, with more than 420 cases reported in the country's volatile east. There is hope at the end of the tunnel. After years of living in limbo, Senegalese refugees in Guinea-Bissau are finally getting identification cards. And political leaders eulogize former U.S. President George H.W. Bush, praising him for his military courage, political accomplishments, and courteous personality. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. We begin tonight in Central Africa, where the Democratic Republic of Congo is fiercely fighting its 10th known Ebola epidemic and its worst ever outbreak of the ravaging disease. More than 420 cases of Ebola have been reported in the country's volatile east, with a mortality rate of just under 60%. But this epidemic is unusual because more than 60% of patients are women. VOA's Anita Powell visited the two Ebola hotspots and reports from the town of Beni.
This is as close as we can get to 1-month-old Benedict. She has Ebola and has spent the last 3 weeks of her life in this plastic isolation cube at a hospital in Beni, a town of some 500,000 people in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Her mother had Ebola and died giving birth. More than 400 people have been diagnosed with Ebola here since August. That makes this the second worst outbreak in history, after Ebola killed more than 11,000 people in West Africa between 2013 and 2016. This is the 10th outbreak to strike this vast nation since 1976, when Ebola was first identified in Congo.
I think it has become the worst outbreak in Congo, and this is not a mystery.
But what is mysterious is the demographics of this outbreak. This time, more than 60% of cases are women, says the government's regional health coordinator.
All the analyses show that this epidemic is very feminized. Figures like this are alarming. It's true that the female cases are more numerous than the male cases.
Dr. Bate declined to predict when the outbreak might end, though international officials have said it may last another 6 months. Epidemiologists are still studying why this epidemic is so skewed toward women and children.
So now we can only guess. And one of the guesses is that women are the caretakers of sick people at home. So if a family member got sick, who is taking care of him or her? Normally a woman.
Or a nurse. Many of those affected are health workers.
The pain was enormous and the pain was constant. The headache, the diarrhea, the vomiting, the weakness. It was very, very bad there.
For those infected, the road to recovery is long and lonely. This is as close as anyone can get to those recently cured without protective gear. Recovery has been tough, this woman explained, from 4 meters away. But as her children made clear, Ebola will not contain their spirit. Anita Powell, VOA News, Beni, Democratic Republic of Congo.
The U.S. Embassy in the Democratic Republic of Congo reopened today, more than a week after shutting down due to a terrorist threat. On Monday, a U.S. official told VOA the threat came from a group affiliated with the Islamic State militant group. The U.S. official, speaking on the condition of anonymity, was unable to say whether the group's members were Congolese nationals or from outside the country. The State Department has declined to comment on the threat, which had kept the embassy closed since November the 26th. 15 migrants have died off the Libyan coast after spending 12 days at sea without food or water, according to an Egyptian survivor. The owner of a beach chalet found the migrants' boat washed ashore near the city of Misrata and called authorities, who brought them to the Red Crescent Relief Service and hospital. Libya's western coast is a departure point for mainly sub-Saharan African migrants fleeing wars and poverty and hoping for new lives in Europe. Since last year, the number of migrants reaching Italy has fallen sharply as smuggling networks inside Libya have been disrupted, and the European Union has stepped up efforts to boost Libyan Coast Guard patrols. After years of living in limbo, Senegalese refugees in Guinea-Bissau are finally getting identification cards. Some of the refugees have been living in the small West African nation for more than 20 years after fleeing unrest in Senegal's Casamance region. Ricky Shyrock has more from the town of Pelundo.
Ibrahima Ingo fled southern Senegal in 1992 due to unrest in the country's Casamance region. Since then, he has lived in Pelundo, near Guinea-Bissau's border with Senegal. This is the first time he will register for his national ID card as a citizen of Guinea-Bissau.
It's really important because it allows us to move freely in Guinea-Bissau.
Almost 1 year after Guinea-Bissau announced it would grant citizenship to all Senegalese refugees in its borders, the United Nations Refugee Agency began registering some of the nearly 10,000 Senegalese refugees in the country. Many of them, like Ibrahima, arrived over 2 decades ago. Since 1982, waves of Senegalese have fled Casamance, the site of a low-intensity conflict between the government and Casamance separatists.
Before getting naturalized, there is a big difficulty to have a job access to land, and it's also difficult to move around freely. There are some who need to travel, but if they are a refugee, it's difficult to have a passport.
Despite a lack of economic opportunities, refugees say Guinea-Bissau residents have been welcoming.
They gave us a field to work. The 3rd or 4th year after we arrived, they gave us a part of the bush to plant cashew seeds. That allowed us to do what we wanted to improve our lives here in Guinea-Bissau.
As dozens of people lined up to register in Pelundo, Ami Diatta reflected on what the new documents mean to her and her family.
If you don't have paperwork, you're treated like a foreigner. You won't have problems if you have paperwork.
Previously, the Guinea-Bissau government was asking for about $1,500 per person to handle the registration process. The UNHCR managed to negotiate the fee down to $257. Now the registration is underway. 27 years after fleeing her village, Diatta can finally call Guinea-Bissau home. Ricky Shyrock for VOA News, Pelundo, Guinea-Bissau.
U.S. President Donald Trump and First Lady Melania Trump paid a silent tribute to former President George H.W. Bush, whose body is lying in state at the U.S. Capitol Rotunda in Washington, as Americans honor the life of America's 41st president. The Trumps stood beside the late president's casket for about 1 minute before the President Trump saluted Bush. The couple then left the rotunda. The Capitol is open for dignitaries and the public to pay their respects through early Wednesday. Visitors are allowed to walk past Mr. Bush's casket. Bush died in Texas, his home state, late Friday at the age of 94 after several years of failing health. Political leaders eulogized George H.W. Bush at the U.S. Capitol on Monday, praising him for his military courage, his political accomplishments, and his courteous personality. On Wednesday, Bush will receive a state funeral at the Washington Cathedral here in Washington. Here's VOA's Laritza Hoke.
The former president's body is lying in state at the Capitol Rotunda, where dignitaries and ordinary people can stop by to pay their respect. Former President George W. Bush, with wife Laura, accompanied his father on his last trip to Washington. His other children and family members also attended the arrival ceremony at the Capitol on Monday afternoon. Bush's former closest aide and Secretary of State James Baker, former Vice President Dick Cheney, and former Secretary of State Colin Powell joined members of Congress to honor the Republican president. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell praised decades of Bush's steady service to the country.
Decorated aviator, congressman, ambassador to the United Nations, envoy to China, CIA director, 8 years as vice president, and our commander-in-chief. Through the Cold War and the Soviet Union's collapse, he kept us on course. When the rule of law needed defending in the Persian Gulf, he kept us on course. With his even temperament and hard-won expertise.
Outgoing Speaker of the House Paul Ryan also remarked on Bush's gentlemanly demeanor.
Throughout his life of service, President Bush personified grace. His character was second to none. He reached the heights of power with uncommon humility. He made monumental contributions to freedom with a fundamental decency that resonates across generations.
Vice President Mike Pence was the third and last to speak at the ceremony. He addressed his condolences to the grieving Bush family and conveyed condolences on behalf of President Donald Trump. Pence expressed admiration for the late president's courage and sense of duty.
After the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in December of 1941, he wanted to do his part, so he enlisted in the United States Navy on his 18th birthday. On receiving his wings, he became the nation's youngest naval aviator and was sent to the South Pacific, where his story almost ended.
The state funeral for President Bush will take place at the National Cathedral on Wednesday. President Trump is expected to attend. The body will then be returned to Texas for the burial Thursday at the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library and Museum near Dallas. Zlatica Hoke, VOA News, Washington.
Well, for more on the life and legacy and state funeral of President George H.W. Bush, I'm joined by Patsy Widakuswara, VOA White House correspondent, and Nyaka Lagoke, an analyst and assistant professor at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. Welcome to both of you. Let me start with you, Patsy. First, what a scene to behold. What we continue to be witnessed at the Rotunda. This is a very rare occurrence. And why, to our viewers, did President George H.W. Bush kind of deserve this honor at the Rotunda?
Well, traditionally, I think this is standard practice for all state funerals, especially for past presidents. But of course, there's a lot of pomp and circumstance, and there's a lot of remembering of his legacy as well. And I think it's also very highly notable to stress that these funerals are the one time where all past presidents come together. And I think in this time, we'll see 5 presidents being together at the same place. That's Jimmy Carter, Clinton, Obama, Bush Jr., and of course, President Trump. So this will be something very interesting to watch. And it's also a really good time to just watch the American political tradition come into play as to how they respect past presidents.
Some people might have expected President Trump to be present yesterday, earlier on, but he actually made a visit to the Capitol in the evening. Is there any particular reason, or is there something we don't know?
Yeah, well, this of course reminds us of what had happened a few months ago when Senator John McCain passed away, and there was a lot of acrimonious sentiments between the two. Senator McCain specifically said that he did not want President Trump, who's from the same party as he is, the Republican Party, to attend any of his funeral arrangements. That is not the case with President H.W. Bush's case. With his funeral, the Bush family has invited President Trump, I believe last summer, to be involved, although he will not be delivering the eulogy. This is against tradition. Usually living presidents, current presidents, are the ones who give eulogy to past presidents. But of course, the Bush family is different. They also have a president in their family, and he, President Bush Jr., will be delivering the eulogy. But it has been very much stressed both by the White House and also by the Bush family that for this particular funeral, they want to avoid any kind of mention, any kind of anti-Trump sentiments, as we have seen or witnessed in the past with John McCain's.
Professor Nyaka, for those in Africa who may be old enough perhaps to remember his presidency, or those who may not have experienced it but may want to know, what significance did his presidency have for Africans, for issues that related to Africa at that time?
Yeah, it's of course, when we look at with the legacies of political figures, we have to have a comprehensive understanding of the contributions and the achievement into society. Yes, in America, he's a great figure and he advanced American interest. But in Africa, it's a little bit different because he was a member of the CIA, and then we know the disastrous role of the CIA in Africa. And then tomorrow in Ghana, we're going to celebrate the first All-African People's Conference, which was the first major Pan-African conference organized by Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana. And then Kwame Nkrumah was overthrown by the CIA on February 24th, 1966. And then, of course, George Bush, the father, was the vice president of Reagan. And then they supported apartheid. And then this is also part of their legacies. And even though Mandela was freed when Bush was the president. But this was due to historical context and international pressure and external pressure.
So to the best of your memory, did he play a part in those negotiations between 91 and 93 when apartheid completely was unraveled?
Definitely, yeah. You know, of course, we have to, you know, I'm not going to deny that. Definitely, it was under his watch that Mandela was freed. But of course, but the reality is not because he believed in freedom, justice, and equality in South Africa, but because of the international pressure and the mobilization across the globe. Then he did not have any other thing to do but to accept like the turn of the change of event in South Africa.
Now, Patsy, we know that traditionally in all societies people don't talk so much ill of the departed, but there's been a lot of just praise from all leaders from all parties internally in the United States. Was that all about all the greatest things that he did, or have there been some who say, well, he may not have been perfect, he was just human too?
Well, that's true, and I think as any other president, President H.W. Bush has a complicated legacy. We have to look at his one-term presidency as a time where there's quite a few wars, right? There's that war with Panama, with Noriega, which was very short, but still was a war. And then, of course, the Iraq War, when he was able to gather an international coalition to go after Saddam Hussein, who invaded Kuwait. And also, he shepherded the end of the Cold War, the end of the Berlin Wall. So there are some mixed successes there in terms of foreign policy, but what was also interesting is that even though at the end of his term he had a very high approval rating, almost 90%, which was almost unheard of, yet he did not get reelected. So that's an interesting thing, because and if you look at presidential historians now looking back, what did he do wrong? Is the fact that a lot of people felt that he looked too much outside. He was too focused on foreign policy and neglected domestic policy, in particular the American economy, which started to go down in decline at that time. Yes. And then came Bill Clinton, of course, with his slogan, "It's the economy, stupid."
Yeah. Very quickly, Nyaka, could it be also that his legacy in Africa was kind of determined by the events of the time? It was the Cold War, and some of the things were way beyond a person, an individual like George H.W. Bush.
No, of course, it's a difficult question. I understand that. It was the Cold War, but the Cold War was not a fatality, right? Because the leaders, the U.S. and then the Soviet, they have decided that that was the way, to conduct business. But we can understand that. But there were some events that happened in Africa that could have been avoided, and it was not necessary to have Patrice Lumumba being killed, Kwame Nkrumah being overthrown, and all the people who were standing for the interests of Africa being decimated, with the support of the CIA and many other intelligence agencies from the western part of the world.
Mm-hmm. And some of those we don't know which were extremely, factual, and which are some of those that have also been shrouded in.
Even on the anti-apartheid legacy, though, that's also complicated, because he did enforce the full. He did commit to the full enforcement of the Anti-Apartheid Act. And then he also did end the sanctions early. So again, it's a very complicated.
It's complicated. We'll continue talking about this. We want to thank you very much for joining us today here in studio, Patsy and Nyaka. That's Patsy Widakuswara, White House correspondent, and Nyaka Lagoke is an analyst and assistant professor of history at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at viewer Vince McCory. Still ahead on Africa 54, the world's most comprehensive report on nutrition. But first, a look at Tuesday's headlines.
In Madagascar, presidential candidate Marc Ravalomanana says he's gained a lot of experience since he was removed from power in 2009. He also denies the involvement of any illicit money in the financing of his campaign. In Gabon on Monday, President Ali Bongo made his first appearance since falling ill nearly 6 weeks ago in a video shared by the presidency from his medical leave in Morocco. In Nigeria, a group of cycling enthusiasts in Lagos organizes races and sponsors young cyclists in a bid to promote cycling in the country where football gets most of the attention and support. Finally, in Kenya, despite being a refugee from the DRC with a physical disability, Hota Biklere has established a successful tailoring business and is employing other refugees.
Well, it's time now for a health report, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Madu with a global nutrition update. Lino.
The world's most comprehensive report on nutrition was released recently, highlighting the worrying prevalence and universality of malnutrition in all its forms. In 2018, the Global Nutrition Report says worldwide, 1/3 of reproductive age women are anemic, while 39% of the world's adults are overweight or obese. And each year, around 20 million babies are born underweight. Africa is by far the hardest hit region of overlapping forms of malnutrition. Of 41 countries that struggle with 3 forms of malnutrition, childhood stunting, anemia in women of reproductive age, and overweight among women, 30 are in Africa, or 73%. In its 5th edition, the 2018 Global Nutrition Report provides a concrete overview of progress made and highlights solutions from around the globe, calling on all stakeholders to act now to address malnutrition. Joining me now via phone from Dodoma, Tanzania, is Obe Aseri, Director of Coordination of Government Business, Office of the Prime Minister of Tanzania. Mr. Aseri, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
The report says that malnutrition is present in every country in the world. What is your reaction to this? Did you find this surprising at all?
Can I correct also my title a little bit?
Okay, absolutely.
But by the time I was writing the report, I was the Director of Coordination of Government Business in the Prime Minister's office, but now I'm the Director of Policy and Planning in the Ministry of Agriculture.
Great.
So,
fantastic.
Yeah.
So what is your reaction to the report, especially the fact that malnutrition is present in every country in the world?
My reaction is that's true. It's a true statement given the state of malnutrition in the world. We are talking of double burden now, or triple burden of malnutrition, whereby some countries, the developing countries mostly, they were struggling with undernutrition. But now it's no longer the issue. It's not only undernutrition, and also overnutrition. In the developed world, while they've addressed most of the undernutrition, they are still really having a problem of overnutrition. So it's a global problem. That's my reaction for now.
So when we talk about overnutrition on the continent of Africa, clearly, as you mentioned, there is not enough awareness, perhaps. What do you think that needs to be done for more awareness?
I think there is the strategy or the focus has always been really to deal with undernutrition in most of the African countries, because that has been the big problem. And most of the countries, while concentrating on undernutrition, they are really forgetting on overnutrition. So I think we need, as a continent, to design the programs that address all forms of malnutrition, taking into cognizance that also the overnutrition is increasing. The statistics are showing clearly that what we had in past decade was not what we have today. The overnutrition is increasing, the obesity and the overweight is increasing. So it's really the strategy which will address all forms of malnutrition. So that's what all the countries need to do now and implement those strategies.
And quickly, Mr. Asseri, drawing from past experiences in addressing undernutrition, what do you think the next steps should be in the short run?
In terms of undernutrition?
Yes.
I think the next step for all the countries, what they need to do is to have really robust multi-sectoral plans that involve all the players on the ground and make sure those strategies are implemented. Because most of the time, malnutrition has been taken to be a single sector issue, and we are not making major progress.
Mr. Asseri, unfortunately, we have to leave it there. We're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us from Tanzania today. And Obi Asseri is with the government, the Minister of Agriculture in Tanzania. Decades after polio was eradicated from Papua New Guinea, the crippling and sometimes deadly disease has returned in the country. Since the first case of polio was detected in April, the disease has infected dozens more nationwide, prompting the government to declare a national emergency. Doctors are responding to the crisis by providing countrywide immunization. Each child is receiving at least 3 oral doses of the polio vaccine, and hundreds of thousands have already been vaccinated. Despite government and international support, Papua New Guinea's lack of roads and unforgiving terrain have made distributing medicine difficult. A relatively rare strain clinically known as VDP-V1 is spreading in the country. The much weakened version of the polio virus was first ingested as an oral vaccine before spreading throughout the community via fishes. UNICEF Dr. Monjur Hossein explains.
This is not a wild poliovirus that came back, like the wild poliovirus right now circulating only in 3 countries in the world. But this poliovirus is because of the chronic low immunization coverage. And the low level of immunity of a child. When the child gets the polio vaccines, is a live attenuated virus, basically the vaccine. So the vaccines can mutate and become active. The virus can active and pass to the environment, and from there it can circulate, because it's orophycal. The country has been suffering from extremely low coverage of immunization for almost a decade. And that's the reflection the country is. So it's not sudden surprise to the public health community, neither to the government.
And health experts insist the benefits of vaccines outweigh the risk. And that's our health report for today. To stay in touch, find me on Twitter @Lenore Moudou. Vincent, back to you.
Well, thank you very much, Lenore. And be sure to watch Lenore Moudou's health reports every Tuesday and Thursday right here on Africa 54. And that's our show. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. When you slip, you fall down. But how does something slip from your mind?
Slip one's mind.
Let's listen to Anna and Jonathan.
Look at this beautiful cake I made for the dinner party.
Oh no, is that tonight?
Yes. Didn't you make something?
No, it totally slipped.